Hey, and welcome back, everybody, to Backtrekking, the podcast where we look back at the real-world inspirations behind classic episodes of Star Trek. I'm one of your hosts, Caliban, and the holodeck ain't the only thing turned on, because every girl crazy bought a sharp-dressed Klingon. I'm joined on this episode by my co-host.
I'm Gooey, and I'm wearing one of those hats. You know what type of hat.
They flick out?
Yeah.
And scare your Klingon? And we've returned to explore the stories behind your favorite Trek shows, and today we're talking about one of the most famous characters in Western literature and the TNG episode that he inspired. It's the Sherlock Holmes short story, The Final Problem, and the Star Trek The Next Generation episode, Elementary, Dear Data.
We're finally getting down to it. We're figuring it out.
Yeah, it seems weird that it's taken this long, but yeah, we are.
This is like page 1, Trek inspiration.
It is. Yeah, and this is kind of, slight spoilers, I guess, for later in this show season, but, we'll be talking about later in the year what you call the Let's Hang Out with Famous People episodes of Star Trek. But I think they kind of, in a way, start here. This is one of the first times that we really see what the holodeck can do, and it's also hanging out with not a famous person, a real person, but a literary person.
Yeah, that's the thing. There's like a spectrum, and it's like, let's hang out with real famous people. Let's hang out with fictional famous people, or I guess the Big Goodbye is an example of like, let's hang out with people who are based off of real fictional characters, but aren't those fictional characters because we don't. We don't want to pay out for that. So
the world of Dixon Hill is all well and good, but what if we go right to the source and do Sherlock Holmes?
What is that? That's like basically public domain, right? They can do that.
It's weird because every time they do one of these Sherlock TV shows, and there's a lot of them, or Sherlock movies, I feel like you hear about the Arthur Conan Doyle estate making noise over something. Like they were mad recently that Henry Cavill was going to be too happy. He was going to show emotion as Holmes in the Enola Holmes movie. And two things. One, Henry Cavill showing emotion. I don't think that's a thing. And number two, what? Holmes has no emotion? Or he can't be happy? Like, I don't see what their problem was. But I'm guessing that maybe they make a lot of noise because they don't have a lot of control. I don't know. Maybe they do.
It seems like you can probably do whatever you want.
At this point, as far as like copyright goes, and I'm not sure about international copyright, but certainly American copyright, like he is in the public domain. And there are plenty of pastiches, and there's plenty of people, to write like a Holmes type novel. But I feel like maybe you have to kind of come and kiss the ring before you do something like that.
You just got to get their approval. Okay. Well, whatever. That's fine.
How can anybody at this point hurt the prestige of Sherlock Holmes as a character? Like anything that you add to him isn't going to hurt the original stories.
At this point, it's so ubiquitous or whatever. It's all encompassing that it's beyond even like doing parodies. It's just like seeped into all aspects of our culture. So I don't know.
Yeah, like, you're going to do, he's a doctor and he is a Vicodin addict. That's fine. And he's going to do all kinds of crazy things. Or, he's Robert Downey Jr. and he's going to do slow motion mind fighting with
hell
people.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of things that you can do with that character. Or his niece, is off doing things. So he's definitely been opened up to the entire range of literature at this point. But we'll talk about that in a sec. First of all, maybe we'll talk a little news in the world of Star Trek. Of course, the big story in the week that we are recording this is that Star Trek: Strange New Worlds will be premiering soon on Paramount Plus, which I think a lot of people are looking forward to.
Yeah, that's fun. I'm looking forward to checking it out for sure.
I have not heard a bad word about it yet. I have a couple friends who have seen the first 2 episodes, and they've said good things. I haven't dug too deeply into people's reviews just because I don't want to be spoiled myself. But nobody has said anything bad. No qualified praise that I've seen so far.
Okay, that's good. Well, yeah, I kind of take all the pre-praise with a grain of salt because I'm like, who's seen this, like,
Right.
yeah. I'll wait till it's available. I'll make my own call.
Well, that's a smart thing to do.
Yeah.
But Star Trek fans, I think, are sometimes brutally honest about things. So I'm sure that if they didn't like something, they would speak up about it. And they have. Many Star Trek fans are upset over the fact that the character of Captain Robert April, or perhaps Admiral Robert April, will be appearing in the first couple episodes of Strange New Worlds. And they have cast a black actor, Adrian Holmes, in that role, a character who's only been seen on screen before in the animated series, where he's an old white guy.
Oh, okay. Okay. It doesn't matter.
No, it doesn't matter at all.
It's not,
it absolutely doesn't matter.
I don't know. I don't think I've seen that episode. I think I've read about this character on like a wiki somewhere. So
Right.
But it's good, it gives everyone something to argue about. So that's cool.
That is a very sanguine way to view this. Unless sanguine, maybe more histrionic way to view it is, Jesus Christ, with the Star Trek fans and the racism still. Like, what's going on with this? Come on. People are mad that Uhura has short hair in Strange New Worlds. And it's just like, why does anybody have anything to say at all about any of this? I just don't understand.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean it'll be fine though, because in the end it just gets more people who are excited about the show, they just get behind it even more, so that's fine. It'll be fine.
Okay, I guess that's a good way to look at it. I'm not super familiar with this actor. I think he's been on Arrow. I'm not sure who he played on Arrow. I know that he plays Uncle Phil on the Fresh Prince reboot. So that's kind of interesting. I'm not sure if that makes Pike Will Smith's character from Fresh Prince. But yeah, he's a cool looking guy. And I'm excited to see him in the new show.
Yeah, it is funny, like, because Star Trek it's always been like, let's kind of flip things on its head a little bit, and sometimes in ways it's like looking back on some of the things that if it happened now, it's like kind of innocuous or whatever, but at the time was this is kind of a big deal. But it's funny. Maybe it is because now some of those things we look back on, like they tout a lot like first interracial kiss or something like that. And maybe now it's like, who cares, And so maybe the people who are, outraged about that, maybe it's because they're comfortable with that now. That's not really that big of a deal to them. That it's like, now we've gone too far. You know what I mean? Like, oh, now Star Trek's gone too far, not before when it.
I'm sure there were plenty of Star Trek fans in 1968 who were not happy about the kiss between Kirk and Uhura. But it's just like, how, if listeners are familiar with the concept of an Overton window, like, how slow does this window move? Guys, come on. Like, we're in the 2020s now. We are in a future that Roddenberry certainly didn't live to see, and he could barely imagine. And he just wanted this idea, an idea I think that anybody who believes in people's basic humanity and civil rights shares. And yet you've still got people who are making this stink. Honestly, you have to wonder, I wonder at least, at the disingenuousness of these critics. Like, is it just the thing now where there's so many sides, and people who are on the quote-unquote other side are so sensitive to anything that they see as a change motivated not by talent or by just storytelling, but by an attempt to make things more woke, And so even though they are not themselves, or wouldn't consider themselves, or whatever, racist, they see this, having this character be cast with an actor of color, and immediately they're like, oh, my alarm bells are going off. It's time to take to Twitter, to take to Reddit and complain about it. Although I don't actually have a thought or feeling about it because it's such a small thing. Just a guy cast in a show.
Right. Yeah, I can see, like, and this is obviously not the people criticizing it. I can see, though, where it's like, there are sometimes where it's like, it's cynical, it's just like, whoever's making the show cynically casting that person. Maybe even
Well,
because
it's so we live in such a fucked up time that we can characterize, like, you know, adding diversity to a show as something that's done cynically.
It's true though. I think,
but I understand how you're framing it.
Obviously, that's not the criticism though. But that does happen, and that benefits people sometimes because they, like I said, it gives people something to argue about. But what's ridiculous about this one is, like, it's a character with, like, almost nothing, you know, like,
we don't know anything.
Nothing defines this character at all. So, like, to me, that seems like one that's, like, you know, like if they came out and they were like, okay, we're casting a new Spock, and he's, like, you know, South Asian or something like that. It's like, obviously they know that is going to, you know, spark a lot of conversation. I'm not saying it's good or bad. I'm just saying they would know that would spark a lot of conversation. But I don't really think that Robert April, is that his name? I don't even know his name. You know,
that's his name.
I don't know. Okay.
Yeah. Why isn't the Enterprise called the Yorktown? I'm mad. Yeah.
Oh my god.
Why can't Uhura be white for once? Yeah. Right.
Oh sure. Yeah. Oh my god. Jeez.
So anyway, I'm sure that, well, I'm going to let the show stand on its own merits, and I'm sure that it will. But maybe we'll, you're going to watch it, right?
Yes, because then the other interesting part about this is that, like, I'm someone who, I don't really like a lot of the new Star Trek shows that much. Like, in fact, some I really dislike. But it's not because of that. So it's like, it's so interesting that everything's like a culture war now. Because I'm like, I don't really like the show, but I'm not like, I don't know, who are my allies? Like the cock guy, like, he hates the show. I guess I'm on his team, but no, I'm not on his team.
Yeah, there aren't enough teams. And you see this in all kinds of, I don't even want to call it criticism, but, like, I suppose, you know, internet commentary where, can't The Last Jedi just be kind of a goofy, wild swings of tone, badly paced movie? Does it have to be, like, a banner for, like, the anti-woke crowd to scream that Star Wars has been ruined? Can't it just be sort of an overreach and a bad idea instead of?
Because you don't like that movie very much, but
no, I didn't really like it.
And
much.
that's like. Yeah, that's like a lot of people I know are like, don't really like that movie, but they're not mad because, I don't know, there's women or something. It's just, like, not a good movie, you know. Like,
these women, they're ruining our Star franchises.
I don't know.
Yeah, it makes me sad, but I'm glad that you're going to watch it, and maybe we'll talk about it on a future show.
Oh well, if they're doing episodic stuff, that's going to lend itself to our show even better.
Oh, yeah.
Because usually you have a more. I feel like you get a better comparison point. Because it's hard to sum up someone's story in, like, Discovery without, you know, the whole season their story takes place, and, like, what inspiration that could have. It, you know, it's kind of harder to nail down, you know. Yeah.
So maybe listeners should look for us covering Strange New Worlds in the future.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, let's get to our featured subject for this week's episode. There are few characters in Western literature as successful and as well-known as Sherlock Holmes. Since his initial debut in the 1887 novel A Study in Scarlet, Holmes would go on to appear in 3 more novels and 56 short stories by creator Arthur Conan Doyle, as well as countless pastiches and unofficial stories by subsequent authors. Holmes has become the very archetype of the deductive investigator, the cerebral hero who provided the inspiration for many other successful characters like Mr. Spock, Dr. House, and the Batman. In addition to inspiring TV characters, Holmes is no stranger to the big and small screens himself, having appeared in over 250 films, TV series, and documentaries, bested only by Victorian literature's other singular character, Dracula, with 272 appearances. Unsurprisingly, Holmes has faced Dracula in a pastiche novel and has tangled with other villains of his era, like Jack the Ripper, Mr. Hyde, and Cthulhu, besting them all. But there was one foe equal to him in intellect and cunning, a foe he could not best without sacrificing his own life. And Sherlock Holmes, the world's first consulting detective, would meet his match in Professor James Moriarty at Reichenbach Falls in the 1893 Arthur Conan Doyle short story, The Final Problem.
It is with a heavy heart that I take up my pen to write these the last words in which I shall ever record the singular gifts by which my friend Mr. Sherlock Holmes was distinguished. In an incoherent and, as I deeply feel, an entirely inadequate fashion, I have endeavoured to give some account of my strange experiences in his company, from the chance which first brought us together at the period of the study in Scarlet, up to the time of his interference in the matter of the naval treaty, an interference which had the unquestionable effect of preventing a serious international complication. It was my intention to have stopped there, and to have said nothing of that event which has created a void in my life, which the lapse of 2 years has done little to fill.
That's so sick he's fought Dracula.
Oh, yeah.
They haven't put Dracula in Star Trek, by the way. What's going on with that?
I know. And you know that, like, so the guy that wrote this episode, he had done some other, we're jumping ahead to the episode, I guess, but he had done some other TV writing, but he was mainly like a professor of history, and he had also written nonfiction works about crime, like true crime stuff. And so you know that they get pitches like, what if Dracula shows up, like what Abraham Lincoln fights Dracula? They must get things like that. And it must be just part of a rule like, no, we don't do that kind of stuff. You know what I mean?
Dracula would be so cool, though. Like, Q could make
Dracula Jack the Ripper, real. Of course, did appear on Star Trek, on the original Star Trek.
Yeah, that's true. Dracula's better. I'd rank him higher on people that should appear.
Yeah. And I had to say that he's an alien or something. Maybe that's just like too cheesy, or it is like, as I mentioned, like it's thoroughly tread ground. But there was an entire series of books called Anno Dracula, which is like the ultimate Victorian pastiche, where Sherlock Holmes is Dracula rules England. It's the Victorian era, and he's the king of England, and so Dr. Jekyll and Sherlock Holmes and all these Victorian literature figures are sort of like fighting against him, but kind of like a literary precursor to your League of Extraordinary Gentlemen type stories.
Yeah, that'd be pretty cool. Yeah, I'm okay with it. It is a little cheesy, but I think it'd be fun.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like, it's so interesting that I feel like we are still, in a lot of ways, influenced, obviously because these characters are still around, but we're influenced by the literature of this specific time. The novel was not brand new in the late 19th century, but it was definitely becoming more read by the masses. And of course, the Holmes stories, excepting the 4 novels, were at first published in the Strand newspaper starting in 1891. And so they were available to a wider public, to a wider audience. And so these characters have sort of captured the imagination. And I can't remember who I was talking to, I don't know, a friend of mine recently, but I was talking about the fact that now that we have mass media, every character that's created basically will never disappear. Both because they have a higher level of exposure than any character ever, but also because they're all IP now. Do you know what I mean? They're all owned by somebody. So I'm not saying that I think Sherlock Holmes is fascinating, and what many creators have done with Sherlock Holmes to change him into Dr. House or to Detective Conan or whatever it is great, but the character won't ever really go away because there's always sort of money to be made from them. So it's a little cynical, but at the same time, he remains this very fascinating, interesting character.
Yeah, and it is like, you mentioned how it's like they've made him into House and all these other things, but even beyond that, like, I think just, you mentioned like the style of that type of story, just kind of taking over everything. You see its DNA in things that aren't even like, meant to be drawing from it, just the like type of, especially mysteries, but I think other things.
The primetime, TV mystery procedural owes everything. The Murder, She Wrote, your Columbos, your Quincy MDs,
even all the
or MEs,
Law and Order and stuff, kind
of. Or Law and Order, sure. And, like crime fiction, Poe kind of invented the detective story and arguably crime fiction, but it was really Doyle that popularized it.
But you really feel like, well, the story we're talking about today doesn't have it, but like other Holmes stories, the more traditional ones, I just finished reading The Hound of the Baskervilles just to.
Oh, nice.
Because I've also seen Sherlock done, everywhere, but I kind of wanted to also just like, okay, what's like taste of, the original, or like, what the average type of thing was. And like, it does have this sort of like formula. You can feel all the chess pieces being put in place. You're like, oh, I can solve this mystery myself. It's got that same thing of when you're watching, any other sort of mystery thing like that. And they're laying out all the facts, at least if it's done well. But, you can see it now where it's almost, it has been reduced to like a formula, and I think it's like definitely the found. So yeah, just even outside of stuff inspired by Sherlock Holmes, is like almost everything is in a way, or at least that's that style.
Yeah, and I haven't read all of Sherlock Holmes, but I've read a lot of the original Sherlock Holmes stories, and something that I like about them is, nowadays, especially with cinema, with visual medium, you can kind of give people the clues and not call them out, and so you can kind of follow it, and I guess if you're paying attention, if you're smart, you can kind of, arrive at the solution early. It's hard to do that in Sherlock Holmes stories. Sometimes you can, but a lot of times Sherlock Holmes will look at a bunch of stuff and go, "That's it," and then run out of the room. And like, they don't kind of tell you what he's thinking until he sort of lays it all out for you at the end. Mm-hmm. And so it's not something that you can he kind of, eliminates the danger that the audience will get ahead. There's nothing worse in a mystery of you being like, "I know what it is. Let's get there already. Come on." But they kind of avoid that in the way that they're structured. Also, them being short, most of the stories really helps. Yeah. Some of the more recent adaptations of, like, for instance, the recent BBC series, I think sometimes suffers in the fact that the episodes are like 90 minutes. And so they have to like take a couple of the stories and kind of adapt them or try to squeeze them into something with kind of varied results sometimes.
Right. Yeah. Because like, I think we've talked about a lot about how like a short story often adapts really well into Star Trek. It's like almost like the perfect chunk of story to make into a 45-minute TV show. And I did watch, I think back in the day, like the first season of Sherlock, and it felt like, even though it's a short series, I was like, this kind of feels like stretched thin a little bit. And like they kind of had to add in like, we're having like an overarching thing, and it was kind of like, it just felt like teasing it for the sake of teasing it,
Yeah. First, that I don't know. I think there's more bad episodes of the BBC Sherlock than there are good ones, but I think the first episode is really, really good. The second episode is like weirdly racist. Like they, Holmes definitely went up against people who were not depicted well. They were not white. But why would you do it in a 21st century show? Yeah. And then the third episode of the first season did, what I was saying. They take like 6 different Holmes-ish plots and try to cram them into one episode where he's solving all these different mysteries, so they can kind of fill out the time.
Well, they almost go the other way, where it's like they have the visual medium, but yet they're not really letting you into his process. You're just seeing like
his mind palace.
His mind palace. It's all weird. Whereas like in the story I read, they did a good job of like laying out all the evidence, and it's like definitely like, oh, okay, this is suspicious, even if it's meant an innocuous thing. It's like they're telling you this is the evidence, but I think they still did it without like he didn't really give it away, but still had it all there. Whereas like I felt like that show was sort of like, hey, screw you a little bit. But I've forgotten most of it, so I don't know.
Yeah. I'd be interested in I think in the second season of the BBC show, they did Hound of the Baskervilles, and I'd be interested in your opinion of how they did that.
You mentioned the race thing. There was a guy in that book who, one of their buddies is like a practitioner of like race science, and he like examines, they were talking about how like, oh yeah, just that like the look, you can like tell the difference between the skulls of
Yes,
these
the
different
brow
people.
of this.
Yeah.
Oh, God. Yeah.
I was
Yeah,
like,
well,
oh, cool.
you know. Yeah, not great. The first A Study in Scarlet, the first novel, the bad guys are Mormons because everybody was scared of Mormons
Oh, that's
back then.
awesome.
And so a lot of
I have to read
lot
that.
of-
That sounds so cool.
a lot of Mormons don't like that book, and I understand. I understand why they don't. So yeah, they don't always exactly update so well to the 21st century, but they were extremely popular in their day. And you have to remember that this all like exploded. Like Doyle was a guy who he went to school to become a doctor and basically did. He finished his studies and he actually served during his studies on a ship. He was like a ship's surgeon for a while, and he got out of that and I guess when you're rich in that time, you just go to school to be a doctor, and then. But I don't want to be a doctor though. Like he wanted to write, and so he sort of came up with this character, and wrote A Study in Scarlet, the first book, which was not initially successful. Like he took it to a bunch of publishers and kind of ended up at the bottom of the pile, and that book wasn't actually successful, but. Later, he wrote his first short story that was published by The Strand, A Scandal in Bohemia, and it kind of took off right away. And from 1891, when it was first published, to the publishing of The Final Problem in 1893, the character became huge. Like it was just widely popular. It was like a pop culture of today. It was just like everybody was excited about reading these Sherlock Holmes stories to the point where Arthur Conan Doyle kind of wanted nothing to do with it. Like he was like, I just did this for fun. I just wanted some money. Now everybody's asking me about Sherlock Holmes. And so he decided, I'm going to kill this guy off. I'm going to kill him off so I don't have to write these anymore. But, Sherlock Holmes as a hero is so capable. I can only kill him off by creating an opposite number, a villain who has all the skills and determination that Holmes does, the ultimate enemy for Holmes. That's how I can get rid of this guy.
That's pretty good. Like, please stop asking me. I'm going to kill the character.
I write serious books, not this Penny Ante shit about detectives. Yeah. And so they published the story, and the character was killed, and people flipped out. People were not happy about it. And it's hard to know exactly how big the reaction was because in later years, Doyle's son, became the curator of his estate and possibly kind of aggrandized some of the stories about people's reaction. But apparently it's sort of like the War of the Worlds thing, when people got excited over the Orson Welles broadcast, like how were people really thinking that aliens were going to invade? But it makes a good story. And so he says that people were wearing black armbands and black hat bands to commemorate the death of Sherlock Holmes at the time. And the Strand almost went bankrupt because people canceled their subscriptions because they killed off this character that they love so much.
So it's a little different, but it does tie into what we were talking about before we got into the subject of like modern fandom of just like, because this does extend to beyond being mad about like racial casting,
this is maybe the first example of toxic fandom. Hashtag release the Doyle cut.
Yeah, or like that Mass Effect 3 ending or whatever.
Yes.
Or Sonic.
His name was Marauder Shields. Yeah, the Sonic redesign. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, this is like the test case of modern crybaby fandom.
Yes, Sonic redesign equals Hound of the Baskervilles. Yes.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
Yeah, he wrote Hound of the Baskervilles to placate people, and it was, of course, a prequel story. It was set before The Final Problem. And then later, yeah, and that was so successful that he's like, all right, fine. And then after that, he wrote The Adventure of the Empty House, which was a sequel to Reichenbach Falls, or the Final Problem.
Oh, so he came back? I lived. So.
Yeah, basically. Yeah. Don't worry about it. I'm alive.
Okay. Yeah, and that's how it goes back to like, also nothing can go away now. Even if the creator wanted it to, like, it just can't go away. We need to sell more. We need to make more,
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah,
boy.
that guy had to come back. There's no way that we could live without more of that Sherlock Holmes.
Wow.
Sherlock Holmes stories are interesting because there are probably other detective story tropes that we see like later on. Definitely, like when we reach noir fiction, you see the idea of the gumshoe, the detective character who is down on his luck. You know, he needs that $20 that he's going to get from following somebody. You know, or he's rolling his own cigarettes. And at this point, you know, whether it's Poe's Dupin or whether it's Sherlock Holmes, you know, they are very comfortably set in their rooms, you know, and they have to call a special train. You know, a lot of the action depends on whether you leave your luggage in a certain place or not. You know, it's this sort of like these problems that like modern detectives aren't necessarily a Bruce Willis character isn't having to face.
Yeah, it was like, yeah, in the one I read, they're helping like a, you know, rich like landowner baron guy, and like I said, their doctor's like a skull measuring guy. So it's like they're well to do. Yeah, they're like it is a little bit about being a fancy lad, a little bit, you know.
Right? Yeah. I knew that he would never order red wine with fish, so that was our guy.
Oh, yeah. I love when a clue is like that. I do go crazy for that. Like normally I hate that kind of stuff, but I feel like it's just done so well here. I get a big kick out of it almost.
Yeah. Something that is almost always lost, I think, or at least just sort of let go of, is the structure of the stories, which are, you know, in journal form. They're sort of, they have an epistolary structure where they're all recounted in past tense by Watson. Mm-hmm. And so even when, you know, Watson is writing this, Holmes is already dead. And so he has to start by saying, you know, it pains me to write this. And so we've got a suggestion that something tragic is going to happen, but yet he still has to develop the tension for the reader. You know, Holmes arrives and things have already happened to him. So now he has to recount, Holmes is recounting to him of the scuffle that he got in, you know, over on Savile Row or whatever it is. Mm-hmm. And it reminds me a lot of the basic structure, at least the former basic structure of Star Trek episodes, which is that they too are captain's logs. You know, they're introduced by the captain, and sometimes people wonder, like, okay, so at the commercial break came and they were, you know, being threatened by a alien Greek god. How did they know they were going to get out of that? It's like, well, they already did. Like, he's telling you this in his log, like after it already happened. Like it is a recounting of these events that happened.
Yeah, right. And that. Like, depending on how you use it, it can build tension, even, like you said, even if they know what's going to happen. Or, like, for example, in the novel I read, there's times where he switches, where he's like, oh, like, these are my journals, my diaries, and, oh, I think this part would be better if I just shared you the letters I wrote, because so much information occurred that I just wrote it all out. I was writing letters to Sherlock. So, but then it has like such a sense of urgency, you know, and So I do like that, like changing the media, and it just does kind of like hook you into the story a little bit. 'Cause like you do kind of feel like you can, I guess you're like, if you're like Watson, you're kind of a more regular dude, you know, and you're hanging out with this weirdo. And so you kind of are like, get a like, kind of fly on the wall type feeling to the whole story, which helps too.
He is your point of view. Yeah. That structure, that epistolary structure, was very popular back then. You know, we were talking about Dracula before, and all of Stoker's novel is presented that way. Yeah. So I don't know why that fell out of favor. I'm sure it still exists here and there. But...
Right, because now it feels like, at least to me, I don't know a lot about like literature and stuff, but whenever I do encounter that now, it feels like, oh, this is a fun twist. But it's like, it seems like more normal then.
Yeah, I think maybe it's because, well, here's a moonshot kind of theory. I think it's because voiceover is looked down on usually in screenwriting. And that doesn't stop it from being used, believe me. But generally it's thought of as kind of a crutch. Like you do a voiceover if you watch your completed film or your draft and you realize that, oh, we didn't tell the story well enough. So we need somebody to come in and say, I never saw my father after that day, or whatever it is. That's seen as kind of a weak form of storytelling. And that's basically all an epistolary novel is. It's literally just somebody kind of telling you what happened. And so I think you see it now that people watch TV and movies more than they read. I think it's become, less popular, just in terms of media, for how it's employed. And I do think it's interesting that in new Star Trek on Paramount, when the captain's log is employed, it is merely just to do that. Rarely ever do you get a captain's log where somebody's just saying, we're in this sector, I'm catching you up, because we don't need to be caught up. They're just picking up from last week. And when it is used, it's Michael Burnham saying, like, Webster's Dictionary defines trust as, it's just some sort of like
I don't like
bit
that.
of purple prose and
honest.
fluff. Yeah.
Actually, I kind of like, this is kind of weird, but I like even watching streaming and like they go to break and then they come back, even though there is no break. And then Picard's like, this is what's going on. We're trying to figure it out. And I'm like, all right, I got it. I just, I understood what's going on, but I'm glad to I got the knowledge check. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's a chapter title. It's like the old-timey chapter titles where they're like Chapter 5 in which our hero, finds a secret revealed or something like that.
I might be kind of dumb too, because like I have a hard time with reading and like absorbing some of what I read, and it is nice when I read particularly the novel where like they kind of recap. In fact, at the end there was like a chapter where they just recap the whole story. Like Watson just goes like, hey, so Holmes, like, what happened? And he just like retells it all in chronological order, like all the stuff they now know. And I was like,
sure.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, okay, I got what happened. I for sure understood it. Yeah.
Get paid by the word. Yeah.
Maybe that's not a good argument in favor of it. That is what you said. It's like weak storytelling, maybe, but
he got used to writing short newspaper stories. He's like, oh shit, I got to fill this out.
Does it also feel like too, like maybe as we've gone on, this is kind of just like a armchair theory here, but as time has gone on and it's been less popular, maybe the style that can at least still sell, it has become a little bit more formulaic and meant to like appeal to a certain subset of people, and it's less like changing and messing around with the form of like novels and written fiction, I guess, kind of like how I feel like now too, like popularly I think we see a less sort of diverse set of types of movies. That's what I think. We kind of see things that follow more like here's the rules.
Yeah.
Everyone read that book that guy who made the bad movies wrote, and now that's how most movies are.
Huh.
That's my theory. I don't know. My galaxy brain theory.
No, I like it. It's, this story was designed to be the last Sherlock Holmes story. I'm not sure how much care Doyle put into it to put an exclamation point or at least a definitive ending on the character of Holmes. Yeah, I say if you want to kill Holmes, you have somebody shoot him and he dies, right? Like clearly, like he was leaving a little bit of a door open here. What I find to be interesting is that we get this character of Moriarty, a character that, as far as I know, doesn't return. Moriarty is dead, and Holmes is just a better swimmer, I guess. And so, we'll have a character. We'll have people from his organization, who escaped the sort of roundup at the end of the story, like Colonel Moran and other ne'er-do-wells. But it does seem like he was like, well, I mean, I don't just put him on the shelf. I'm not gonna throw him away, because who knows. But it is suitably epic, and I think it's. I mean, like. Nowadays, like Vin Diesel has to drive a car into a helicopter to get an audience off. But I mean, like for a Victorian audience, like Sherlock Holmes, like wrestling with this guy, on top of a giant waterfall in Switzerland, it had to be like that was like the Fast and the Furious for Victorian readers.
Well, it's so exciting, especially because you don't really witness it at all.
Yeah, again, it's
like
all,
that's probably what happened. I don't know,
Yeah, it's kind of sinister too. I like the fact that that Holmes and Watson are, completely themselves in this story. Like, we join Holmes as he is kind of on the run from Moriarty's forces because he's been organizing this dragnet or this trap basically to get Moriarty in his organization. But he's already kind of been like attacked, and he has to like, he tells Watson like, you got to be careful. I'm gonna leave through the back door, and he jumps over the wall, and so we know that like, okay, Holmes is like, if Holmes is worried, we should be worried.
You don't see him like that normally.
Yeah, and then as they go on their little continental tour to sort of get lost, the way that Watson describes, his kind of agitation and his kind of obsession with the idea that no, my work is done. Even if I suspect something will happen, but even if it does, taking out Moriarty and his organization will mean that like I don't have to do anything else. So it doesn't matter what happens to me. I find that kind of interesting that this character who is so superior and usually convinced that he's right and that he's going to win is so fatalistic in this moment.
Yeah, right. Yeah, because you don't like I said, you don't normally see him as like that. Like the other stuff I've read, like there's parts where he's on his toes, he's worried, but you've never seen him take such a strong stance. And I think that goes to show, I guess, how much they're putting over Moriarty quite a bit here.
Yeah.
Which is fun because like, now he's like the way that, especially the way they introduce him in the episode of Star Trek we watch is like, he's kind of viewed as like, he's like this great rival of Holmes, but he's not really in any stories, which is kind of fun. Yeah. They do a lot to build him up. Like, actually, they do kind of do the thing that's happened in a lot of movies lately. It happened in like the Furious 8 or whatever, where they establish like, oh, he's been doing stuff for a while, you don't know about it. They did in like Spectre also, or he's been I don't think they did like he's been behind stuff we've already solved in other stories, I don't think, but they definitely like they started off of like, I've been dealing with this guy for a while, he's like the worst. Like without, like it's not like a, like if you were a fan at the time, you weren't getting like, oh, they're finally taking down Moriarty, but they treat it's almost treated like that.
Yeah, I think that things were not done that way, even though, we talked about the commercial concerns that bring Sherlock Holmes back, but it didn't seem like, obviously we're going to build up to something because it's going to suck people in, and then we can build off of that and jump to something else. Like, it seems like he just went, I'm going to kill this guy. Yeah. So therefore, I have to come up with somebody, not somebody who I've been suggesting is going to show up. I don't remember them very well because I don't think they're very good, but I'm pretty sure that there's a suggestion in like the first Robert Downey Jr. Sherlock Holmes movie that there's somebody's behind the scenes. And then, of course, he does, face Moriarty in the second one. But those movies are they're such a mess. I don't know.
I haven't seen them since they came out, but I remember they're kind of fun, I guess.
They're fun.
Well, that's a thing that I remember was kind of annoying about that show is the Benedict Cumberbatch one was they're like, Moriarty, and I'm like, oh, okay. they did like establish like, oh, he's like the big bad, Yeah. And I guess that's what you would do, right? If you made Sherlock story now. And I don't think that necessarily is bad, but I don't know. I don't know if they pulled it off because I stopped watching.
Oh, did you?
Yeah, I never finished that show. I watched the first season and I was like, I don't really like this.
Okay. Well, I would say the season finale, because there's only like 3 episodes a season, right? So the 3rd episode of the 2nd season is great. It's called The Reichenbach Fall, and I was just ready to talk about it, but now I can't talk about it. And they update. It is kind of based on this, and they update in the way that you're saying that kind of conflict. Like, how could a character like Moriarty sort of maneuver Sherlock into a situation that he can't solve? And it is, it's pretty good.
Okay.
And it had me like jonesing for more, and then the show didn't come out for like another 2 or 3 years. And when it came back, the show sucked. And it was like, oh man, you blew it. Like
All right,
you ended on such a high. But yeah, it's definitely worth watching till the end of the second season.
Okay. I do like, you mentioned, like, that's definitely in the story where it's like he's outmaneuvering and like almost pressing Sherlock, which is a nice twist on it too, which is why I then wanted to like, okay, I want to kind of just get something more traditional, because it really feels like usually Sherlock is trying to outmaneuver someone who maybe is like covering their tracks and we got to figure it out, but you don't, the pressure isn't as much on him, where this feels like the role has almost been switched, where it's like he's trying to conceal himself and away from him. And I mean, that's probably the obvious intention, but I thought it was, it really sticks out in a good way. Like that's like a really strong feeling the whole time.
Yeah, there's a thing in the BBC show where they're always running. That theme plays, and I feel like they're always running down the street to something. And that's something that doesn't exist in a lot of Holmes stories, but it does kind of exist in this one. They are kind of trying to escape. The hand of Moriarty is kind of reaching for them. Even though their running is just, well, we're going to have a short stay here at this hotel before we take a train somewhere else. They're still kind of fleeing.
It's fancy fleeing, yeah.
Yeah, they're fleeing in a fancy style. Yeah. I also like the fact that like a big part of the plan at the end is getting Holmes alone by appealing to Watson in his role as a doctor. This kid, when they're near the falls, runs up and says, "Oh, this woman's hurt and she needs your help." And so, Watson runs back, and of course it's not true. They're just trying to separate them. And you have to think about like, who's that kid? Somebody's written a book about that kid. Like that kid is like a junior member of like the Moriarty organization or something, and he grows up to be, somebody else.
Well, one thing I've learned now from reading 2 Sherlock stories in succession is there's always just some kid that they go like, here, take 5 shillings and go dig through the trash.
Boy. Yeah. Yeah.
Like basically to do like the now you just like Google it or whatever, but now it's like we need a kid, or it's kind of like the guy in Time's Arrow, the bellhop, where it's like, go do the chores. Yeah, just pay some kid to do the chores. So there's an evil version of that who does it for Moriarty. Evil kid.
I mean, he's got evil Baker Street irregulars. Yeah. We're having too much fun to point out that, this can only exist because there are street urchins who are starving and you can give them a shilling to go dig through some trash. So we won't point that out right now. But yeah, I think that is interesting. And I love the fact that Holmes, knows a lot, but he can't know everything. Like the Batman stories that kind of annoy me are when Batman knows how to do everything, and the ones that I like more are when Batman's smart and he knows a lot of fields, but he also knows people who know more than him, and so he can go to them and say, look at this clue I found. And Holmes will do that too sometimes.
Yeah, I'm going crazy right now. Actually, this is sort of off topic, but I was reading The Long Halloween because I haven't read a lot of comics, and I was told this is really good, and I'm liking it. But they track a guy because the bomb he made, they found the nail, and they tell him every nail has a serial number. And we traced this nail to the hardware store it was bought at, and all the way to your receipt, and that's how we caught you. And I was like, that is not even close to true. And
in Gotham there are so many bombs that are made that they individually serial number.
We got to start tracking these nails. Then that feels like, he's Batman.
No more dead cops from nail bombs.
Oh my god. Yeah, don't tell me someone's the greatest detective or whatever, and the way they figured it out is something that's so absurd. And I think that's kind of the struggle of writing one of these stories, is like, you have to do it in a way like Sherlock does come off often as like, wow, he's just like the smartest guy alive, but he doesn't come off as like perfect,
Yeah. He gets things wrong sometimes, or he'll have like 2 different theories about how something is going to go. And if it's not the one he thinks it is, it's like, oh, okay, then it was this other thing that I thought.
Or you can talk about how, like, sometimes the gap in his knowledge, it's like, you know, that's part of the puzzle, I guess. You know, he'll be like, well, I was able to figure out this. It doesn't answer the question, but it puts us on this right track. So
I think it's possibly a Scandal in Bohemia, the first Strand story, but I think Watson says that Sherlock Holmes knows everything that he needs to know about the things that he cares about, but anything that he doesn't care about, like, he doesn't know at all. So, like, he doesn't know, for instance, that the Earth revolves around the sun instead of otherwise, because it doesn't affect his investigations at all. And I think as there's a little power creep involved, like, as the stories go on, like, Holmes, you know, doesn't seem to be completely ignorant of things like that. But it still doesn't explain why Batman doesn't know it's not El Rata, it's La Rata. Come on. That's basic Spanish. How dumb is this Batman?
Bat's got wings too. Yeah. All right. Yeah.
Well, I think we've pretty much covered it. Any last thoughts about the final problem?
Thoughts? It's great. It's a great story.
Yeah.
Actually, like, I mean, it is epic, but I do like how you don't really encounter, like, you don't actually see the big stuff, and it does kind of end like, well, that sucks. Like, it kind of is like, maybe I can see why people are mad, because it kind of is not satisfying of an ending, but I almost liked it that way, because it was like a tragic story about his friend died, you know?
Yeah.
So, great. I don't know. It's a great story.
Yeah, I think that it definitely, if you're getting these, I guess they're monthly, like, if you're getting, you know, one a month for 2 years, you're like, this is some good stuff. What's next? What the fuck? Get my black hat band and kill my favorite character. I could see how people would be kind of put out by that.
I remembered one other thing I wanted to say was, I could also see, this is more for the other story I read, but I could see also just the inspiration for Star Trek. One was they sort of had this ethos of, like, this goes back to the gap in the knowledge thing, in your knowledge thing I said, where they have that almost ideology of, like, eliminate everything else and what's left, you know, no matter how improbable, you know, maybe the answer. So they had sort of that sort of thing that you mentioned, like, inspired stuff like Spock. But I also had, like, in the Baskerville story, they talk about this, you know, spirit, this hound that's haunting them, and it almost had a very Star Trek X-Files type thing, where you find out about this supernatural mystery, and you even have the line of, like, you're saying it's this, and I don't know what to believe, you know? And so it does have sort of that unraveling a sort of supernatural mystery and figuring out, like, what was really going on behind it, you know?
Well, hold that thought, because we're going to talk about how Spock relates to Sherlock Holmes and to Star Trek. But first, let's take a break for a word from our sponsors, and we'll be back with more backtracking. How would you describe Just Enough Trope? We are the Just Enough Trope podcast. I'm your host, Caliban, joined as always by my co-host.
Hi, I'm Mikan Hana.
Oh no, does this mean they can hear all the things I yell at the TV during Downton Abbey?
Why did you do that?
How do you plead?
Let the game begin.
Yeah, check these fresh moves. Oh!
Don't shoot man in face.
This isn't the Save Gotham fundraiser.
It's the Chill Family Reunion.
Master Yoda assigned a Padawan to this bold Jedi.
I think it's pronounced Padawan.
Oh, Padawan, excuse me.
Hey, it's getting late. I think Ralph's going to want his motorcycle back.
Go jerk off the pictures of Jean Grey.
I am freaking getting old.
Yeah, I noticed the life clock was blinking in your hand.
Get out of here, Wilson. Go fight the Teen Titans or something.
I'm unkillable, not unwoundable.
You like Sailor Moon, right? Why don't you sail on this?
Wow.
Just Enough Trope. News, reviews, and geek fondue. Every Monday on the Just Enough Trope podcast network.
Loving me never have a say. You so sorry.
What?
Okay, we're back. It's time to talk about the Trek side of this equation. Even though Star Trek is set in the future, it takes much of its inspiration from the literature of the past. The maritime setting of Trek itself was inspired by the novels of C.S. Forester. Many episodes of Trek ape the structure of the problem novels of the 19th century, and Trek never met a Shakespeare quotation it didn't like. The heroes of Star Trek II are fashioned like heroes of the Victorian age, intelligent, high status, and noble, despite the general egalitarian nature of their world. It's a world in which you can believe a thinking machine could exist and be accepted. Yet Lieutenant Commander Data constantly finds himself having to justify his existence and his basic humanity, the idea of an artificial man apparently falling outside of Starfleet's quest for new life. Pity, then, Professor James Moriarty, endowed by the ship's computer with sentience, but trapped within the confines of a holodeck, knowing there is a world outside, but unable to reach it. Moriarty would be conjured up as Data as Holmes's supposed adversary in the next-gen episode, Elementary, Dear Data.
Next time on Star Trek, The Next Generation.
I accept your challenge, Doctor.
I wouldn't miss it.
Dr. Pulaski challenges Data to solve the Sherlock Holmes mystery in the holodeck.
There is your killer.
Seize her! But the evil Moriarty seizes the ship's computer.
The time for games is over.
In a ruthless plot to sabotage the Enterprise on Star Trek: The Next Generation.
This is an episode that I don't think people have watched recently. It's an episode that I think people remember. I think it is, as like the third or fourth episode of the second season. I think it's one of the first real breakout episodes of the second season. People talk about like, the first season of TNG sucks and the second's not good either. This is one of the first like distinct episodes where the show starts to really separate from TOS and become its own thing. But all that being said, it's okay. It's a lot of Brent Spiner doing his Basil Rathbone impression and poor LeVar Burton just going, "Ooh, yeah, tell me more." And that's kind of it. And then it's got like not really much of an ending, a kind of an anticlimax of an ending.
You know what? I loved it again this time around. I still loved it. Part of it was just because, and this is like beyond any like real critique or anything I can say, is I just threw it on and I was full laundry, and it hasn't been long since I watched through all of TNG, but it just immediately falls over me like a warm blanket. And I was like, I felt so emotional watching it because I was like, I love this show. I love this vibe. And even this episode that maybe it's okay, like I think just the writing and the characters are also strong that I'm just like, this just feels so good to watch. And I felt very comforted by having it on. But beyond that, there are like things I noticed that I do really like beyond just the like nostalgia feeling, of warmth and comfort it gave me. But I am not coming from a very objective place, I can admit.
Well, that's, I mean, nobody really is when it comes to old Star Trek episodes, but people really hate, I think I've seen a rise of distaste for the character of Pulaski in modern Trek fandom because of her dismissal of Data as a character, especially early in the second season. And I would not argue that she is right in dismissing Data as a person, a thinking being, but I would argue that a big part of his journey to gaining that respect and us understanding like his struggle is facilitated by the stories with Dr. Pulaski, in which she goes, no, people do this, humans can do this, he's just doing that. And then, her being proven wrong, or kind of in this episode, it's just sort of like, it doesn't really matter. Like it's, you're trying to make this point, but it's kind of like a solipsistic point in the first place. Obviously Data is, adapting and he's problem solving and he's doing all this. And instead it sort of shifts to Moriarty. And I think where maybe they couldn't do this in the early seasons of a show where we need to focus on our characters still, but I think the episode suffers because it doesn't focus on Moriarty, because we've got this question of Data being alive, and it should really shift to Moriarty. But right by the time that we are starting to ask ourselves, is Moriarty really alive? They shut him down and just kind of move on.
Well, I was convinced. I think I was just convinced by his. I think she is proven wrong, because I think he is the answer to it, because he's even he seems even more. He seems even more real than Data, Yeah. Maybe because he's programmed to act that way, but
maybe the last scene should have then been something with Data and her instead of picking up the ship thing again.
I will say I did like that moment of that. I think they should have kept the ship part, because I did like it was just showing like Picard like the comforting leader. You know, it was like cool. He made cool with Geordi. But I agree. Like maybe a scene at the end of like Data and Pulaski talking. Maybe she doesn't fully come to terms with whatever she believes, but like something could have changed. I actually do really like her as a character. I think she, like, even in this 4th episode, already feels like very established as like what she believes and stuff. And I like that it's in conflict. It's so much in conflict, which is kind of not what they wanted to do. But I like that she is like almost in opposition to him, even though I don't agree with that. I think that's wrong. I think it makes her more interesting, and it does, like, the way she does kind of move the story forward also is very cool. And I don't know, she's just so charismatic and fun despite that.
I love Dr. Pulaski, and that's a great point that you made, that it's weird that, you know, you've got this Gene Roddenberry thing where nobody can have any conflicts, and then
she's like, I think you're not a person.
They fire the original Doctor because of backstage conflicts, and bring on a new character who's just like, I'm going to yell at pretty much everybody I'm in a scene with. And it's not even her. Like, she'll just, I guess Crusher does this, but her delivery is different, because often the Doctor is just relegated to going like, well, wouldn't it be this if it's this? And they go, no, Doctor, because of this and this, you know. But like, she's like in actual opposition to things that people say about things.
Yeah, I love it.
Certainly Data.
She's a hard ass. It's great.
You shouldn't exist. You're an abomination. So anyway, lunch. Yeah.
But they do show like her like that she is like a person who, I don't know, has feelings and opinions, and I just like that. I don't know. They didn't, and that's more of, I think, the writing's fault. But I think in season 1 they don't really do that with Crusher as well. You know, they do a couple times. I agree. And,
it is interesting that we start this episode with this sort of look back at the idea of Star Trek being inspired by, you know, the naval traditions of the British Navy, you know, in the 1800s. Looking back at this model of this ship, although Geordi loves wind and sail, but Generations proves that he doesn't know what a stunsail is. So hashtag fake fan.
yeah, let's expose them.
But I always think it's interesting to see that they like that kind of stuff, and obviously they like it because the writers of the show grew up reading Shakespeare and reading Victorian novels, and so they project that onto their characters. But I wonder, it must say something that by the 24th century, their Navy, you know, Starfleet, still looks and acts like the British Navy. Like, isn't that troubling? Like when I specifically, personally level charges of imperialism at Starfleet, like, it doesn't help that they're calling each other master and commander. You know what I mean?
Especially when Picard's like, we come from a long line of whatever, and I'm like, okay, well, what'd they do? Tell me about
your Navy could be. Yeah, your Navy could be anything you want. You could have ranks or not have ranks. Your ships could be round, and you could do whatever. And I guess it wouldn't have the same romantic feel for modern audiences, which is why they do it. But I do always think it's kind of telling when they have these scenes that are apropos of really nothing, where characters are just like, it was great. You know, did you ever build ships in a bottle when you were a kid? Yeah.
Well, you know what? I think, though, it is true that no matter how far we go into the future, I think there will always be people and like that feeling of like what I just said of turning on TNG, and I'm like, this is so nice. It's not like it's not like that new crap that I hate.
TNG is our Victorian novels. Okay, interesting.
And I think there will be people in the future who look back at even those times, despite all the, you know, as they establish when Q shows up, like all the Barbary or whatever, you know, they'll still look back and they'll think like, a simpler time, you know.
Yeah,
and I think that's just like part of the conflict of being a human and existing. It's like having those same feelings almost.
Yeah,
I don't think like better times, but you know.
Speaking of the future and looking back, this would be kind of hard to to elucidate, I suppose, in a TV script. But like we've talked about all the adaptations of Holmes, all the TV shows and movies and stuff like that exist just a mere 100 or so years after his creation. Add another 300 years onto that. Like what, Data says he's read all the Sherlock Holmes stories. Are you talking about all the Sherlock Holmes stories? What about like the ones from the 22nd century where Holmes was on another planet? Like it seems like for some reason nobody ever wrote any other Sherlock Holmes stories.
That's a thing we always get into too, of like they only reference things from like before the 50s.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like the great Holmes adaptations, like the BBC and Anno Dracula and Schmorkblocks from Rigel 7.
Data just likes the original stuff.
No, he's just a hardcore original fan.
Yeah, to the letter, he only likes the Arthur Conan Doyle or whatever.
I like the fact that this is early on, so people are still impressed by the holodeck. Like the holodeck is just kind of everybody just gets it later on, but people go into the holodeck and they're like, "Wow, this is like really cool." Like this, you assume that they have some kind of holography or holographic entertainment, but this is still the level of interaction and detail is surprising to the characters.
Yeah, we this is sort of a follow up to the Big Goodbye where. Well, honestly, most of that episode it's just them going, "Whoa, wow, whoa."
Yeah. But this is where we really, in concert with the Big Goodbye, this is where we really see what the holodeck is capable of. And it's kind of frightening that Geordi, who, by the way, gets off scot-free at the end of the episode, but Geordi can just go, make a real good program, and then the entire computer goes, the lights go dim for a second, and everybody's like, what just happened? And then you've created this like machine god within the holodeck.
Well, yeah, I get it. Picard forgives him. It's not his fault. That's a huge oversight from Starfleet, and we don't get the episode where they figure it out, but they must figure it out because then later they make like they just make a guy in this episode, and later they make Vic or whatever, and it's fine. Yeah. So they must have figured something out, but yeah, it's not Geordi's fault. But one thing I do like about this episode, because you mentioned it, is I do like the first part of it. It does have sort of like the escalating tensions of almost like a Holmes story where it's like they're starting to set things up, things are getting freaky, what's going on, and it's such a minor thing, but I do like when Geordi asks that question and then cut to Worf and Riker on the bridge like, what was that?
Dude, my clock is blinking 12. What happened? Yeah.
Like it's so obvious what's going on there, but I think I was just suckered in by the whole thing, and I'm like, oh, I love this scene with Worf and Riker on the bridge, looking at the controls, going, I love that.
I feel like it's an artifact of early TNG or early Trek that there had to be a parallel story. Like on the bridge. Obviously you need to make the threat real, but like even in for the entire crew, but even in Big Goodbye, there's the thing with the Sheliak or whatever, and they're going to blow up the Enterprise if they can't get Picard out of the Dixon Hill program. And so they cut back to the bridge with Riker in command, and the ship is shaking. But I feel like in a later episode, maybe in a Voyager episode, you would just have, no, this is a big deal. Like Moriarty's got a gun, and he doesn't want to, but he'll kill us if we don't reveal all of our secrets. And, there's probably some contractual thing where everybody has to appear in an episode, but I didn't feel like too much was gained by cutting back to Troy, looking at Riker worriedly.
Yeah, I kind of forgot.
Although she can sense Moriarty, I guess.
Yeah, that's
how does telepathy work?
Like I said, I like all these little things that are like they suggest something, but you don't know what totally, and it's kind of freaky. Or just those little moments where they end the acts. Like it's just I love that stuff when Data walks out and he's got his picture that he drew of the Enterprise, and you're like, oh snap! I love all that stuff. It does have that sort of feeling of like it's sort of building the tension in a way, but then you did say like at the end it kind of isn't. It stops being about that, which is really cool, and it actually kind of reminded me of the short story in that this wasn't really like a Holmes. We thought it was going to be a Holmes mystery because he he had like set up all this stuff to like capture Moriarty, but then it becomes more about like fighting for your life. So it actually did mirror the original story in that it was a twist on its own sort of form, you know?
Yeah, it kind of like it kind of gives up on that almost immediately, because you think when the computer creates an adversary that can match Data, you think that like Data's going to be wrestling somebody with super strength, you know, or he's going to create some kind of, he's going to set the computer to blow up and there's a fractal code and only Data's brain can change it. Like, how do they match each other? And instead, it's a very Trek thing, but I think that the episode suggests that the knowledge and the self-awareness that he is granted kind of supersedes his villainy. You know, he could do villainous things, but when he becomes aware of his mortality and the fact that he is real, he doesn't, being a villain isn't important to him. He's like, look, I need to live. Like, you have to understand, like, I'm the victim. I'm trapped in here. You know, it becomes less, I'm your adversary, and more, you have imprisoned me. Like, I'm self-aware. I deserve to live. That knowledge makes him empathetic and pitiable.
And that's what makes the ending work for me, just because it's a little part, but just that little part where he's talking to Picard, I think it's all to that actor too, especially. Like, he really sells me on like, this is a guy sort of like pleading for his life almost, you know what I mean? And that's what makes it all work and I guess the little moments, I do like the little moments he has where he's like trying to get something out of Pulaski, you know, like those. That's another reason I like her too, but I think those little moments like sell Moriarty to me, and you do want them to sort of solve his issue, but they don't really get to it here.
Yeah, and I mean, he comes back, of course, in that other episode. I wish that we had seen more of him. I guess maybe it's one of those things where how much can you really do with him? Less is more.
When he comes back and it's been so many years and he's like, okay.
Hey, you were supposed to fix things.
Like, it actually works really well in the context of the show. That was really clever. It's too bad Voyager hadn't gotten back, and because then they could have been like, oh yeah, now you could be a hologram and go wherever you want. Because they get the emitters, right? The Doctor's got the emitter. Yeah.
And that actor's still around, Daniel Davis. So,
but then they'd have to be like, look, we've been deceiving you now for however many years.
And sorry, your program is aged. That's why you look older. Yeah.
Oh man, that would stink. Yeah.
It's interesting because this episode was originally supposed to end kind of how the second Moriarty episode ends, where Picard kind of tricks Moriarty and he is sort of trapped within the holodeck. You know, it's unresolved. And Roddenberry wanted that removed because he thought that it made Picard look, you know, like a lie and a cheat, basically. And he sort of wrestled with Maurice Hurley, his showrunner, over that decision. Of course, once Gene is gone to his reward and Maurice Hurley's also gone, they bring Moriarty back and do just that. You know, they trap him in a cube or a video game or whatever. But originally they didn't really know how to end it after changing that. And I think that kind of shows, like I had mentioned before, I think it's okay to have an open existential question at the end of the episode, but the action is merely, he's just like, well, I want out. It's like, well, we don't know how to get you out. Oh, okay. They just kind of save him and that's it.
I can see both aspects to it, because I can see how, like, basically what happens in the second episode is, like, I feel like a pretty logical, like, extension of what would have kept happening in that original episode. Like, I could see him. He
keeps shaking the ship, and they keep going down to the holodeck and being like, "What?
Well,
let me out of here!"
Like, where he comes and he's like, "Okay, well, I don't want to." Like, when Picard goes to talk to him at the end of Elementary, My Dear Data, I could totally see it playing out where he's like, I don't want to kill us all, but I want you to figure this out now. So, and then all the events of, you know, whatever that next episode could play out. A really weird two-parter that's not action-packed, you know, I could see that. But I do also sort of like that by the end he does have so much humanity that, like, he he's willing to take him on good faith, and he's like, okay, like I'm not actually a villain. Like I'm a new guy, I'll let you figure it out, So I think that works too. And then why he would then later on be like, okay, well now I'm pissed because you're not figuring it out. Like that works. That works for me. I think it works for me.
There's a scene written, maybe not shot, where we do see that Moriarty is super strong, because why give Worf an entire suit and not have him go into the simulation and then get punched out by Moriarty?
Worf looks so good. That would have been great if he punched Worf and Worf broke through like 3 walls, flying back.
Yeah. Yeah, that's my headcanon. But of course we don't see that in the episode. I also liked there's a couple things that I wanted to mention that I liked. I liked how so they tell the computer to write its own story, and we don't really know what happens with that because, like we said, it doesn't really matter. But like while Data and Geordi are running after Pulaski, they almost like accidentally solve a murder.
Yeah,
They're just running by, and somebody's like, "Hey, look, a murder!" And Data's like, "Okay, this is how it happened. Okay, we gotta go," and they just like run off.
Well, too, don't they also say that that's like it was like intended as a distraction or something?
Oh, I see. Okay, so they put that in front of them so they would just focus on that. But
yeah.
Of course, he immediately solves that one. I also like too how I wish that we had maybe just one more scene or a bit longer scene with the very polite hostage situation between Pulaski and Moriarty. I liked the feel of that scene, and I also liked, I don't know if this is what they were trying to suggest or not, but like she's not really telling him. She knows that it could be dangerous to tell him like his true nature. But when he talks about like, oh, you're going to go home, where are you going to? And she's like, oh, well, you can come with me and I can show you. Is she saying that because she knows when he steps out of the holodeck, he'll disappear? So she's trying to kind of trap him. And I thought that was really cool.
Yeah, that's why I loved her in this episode, because you could just feel her trying not to give it all away. And when he says something, I forgot what the exact line is, but where he reveals to her that he definitely knows something, maybe Picard's name or something. And she like has to keep a straight face. She does such a great job of like acting like she has a totally stone face, but also you can tell she knows. And it's like, just, I don't know. I felt the drama. The whole time, but it's so polite the whole time.
Yes. Yeah. Everybody has got their shit-eating grins on.
I also like that they're like sort of play testing early on, like the things we mentioned about like Pulaski being like, no, because the answer to this one, the answer to this one. Okay, now they've just combined the elements. No, we need something original. I did love all that. Where it's like, no, we got to get a real mystery going.
This is one of the few times that Picard uses the French curse merde, which of course means shit, on broadcast TV, syndicated TV in the 1980s.
I didn't even notice. He does that?
With that? Yeah.
Oh, okay. Wow.
Because he's French, you see.
Yeah, naughty Frenchman.
Yeah, so what do they do in... I guess they don't care in France, so it just airs the way it does.
Yeah, you can say whatever you want. Do they really kill someone by pulling a cord and snakes fall down? Did that happen?
That must happen in one of the stories. Yeah, there's a couple different stories that they draw upon to do the things in the events in this episode. The first story is Scandal Bohemia. Of course, they mentioned the Red-Headed League, the Adventure of the Speckled Band, and they mentioned the Bruce Partington plans as well. And so... those all come from somebody was a big fan. Presumably, the screenwriter was a big fan of Sherlock Holmes.
Yeah, they should do this. They should do this with like a CBS property. Like, they should have a character who's like a big young Sheldon fan, and they go into an episode and it's got all the young Sheldon stuff,
Right? Yeah, all the stuff you know and love.
And they're like,
but Jody, is that not a bazinga?
You already know what happens with Sheldon and the gang. We need to create a young Sheldon so powerful.
A villain who can best young Sheldon at his own game.
Wow.
It's
Will Wheaton.
Yeah, that's what it is. Yeah, it's just Will Wheaton in a bolo tie. Oh my God. Well, the technology, as usual, is going wrong in this episode, and it facilitates what the characters do on Star Trek. But just as often, like in this episode, it's the complication that they deal with. So for every episode of this show, we randomly pick from a list of Star Trek technologies. We add what we get to the non-Trek media and subtract it from the Trek episode to see how each is different. We call this our technological exchange. And the list of technologies that we pick from consists of phasers, holodecks, tricorders, transporters, warp drives, replicators, communicators, shields, advanced medical technology, and androids. And boy, there's a couple we could get in trouble with this week, but let's see what we get when we roll on our random number selecting technology. And the result that we get is 1. Phasers. If phasers existed in the world of The Final Problem, how would it be different?
Well, you carry out an assassination a little bit easier, but clearly they were, that could have happened. That could have happened in the original story, though. So
yeah, there's no real weapons in The Final Problem, and there's not always a lot of weapons in Sherlock Holmes stories. Period. But
they did shoot a dog. I saw them shoot a dog.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I suppose that's true. Would this phaser work on this ghastly hound of the Baskervilles?
Pay a street urchin.
Run out and get me a phaser. Well, definitely Holmes would be nursing a phaser wound when he arrives at Watson's apartments.
For sure, yeah.
The climactic phaser duel atop Reichenbach Falls.
See, it works. It's so much better that they probably wrestled, but we don't know. There'd be a whole lot more of there's phaser burn marks here in all the stories, Yeah,
right.
I wish I was more familiar with more of his stories, or I'd be like, here's all the different ways phasers would come in. But he'd probably always be carrying one.
Well, they do kind of deal with this in Star Trek VI, which, of course, Nicholas Meyer. I was going to call him a big Star Trek fan. He wrote 3 movies, not a Star Trek fan, but wrote 3 Star Trek movies, and of course, a big Sherlock Holmes fan, and wrote and directed a Sherlock Holmes movie. And so by his 3rd Trek script and movie number 6, he's like, fuck it. Spock is Sherlock Holmes, and we're just going to dig into that. And so he is trying to solve a murder on board the Enterprise that involves a phaser. Stunned at close range, apparently, can kill somebody, we learn in that film.
Oh, okay.
And we learn it because when you eliminate all the impossible possibilities, the only thing left is the truth. And I got that totally wrong, but you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I don't think I got it right either, but... Yeah, that's exactly right. I think he gets that Spock is partially Sherlock, and that carries over to Data for sure. Like these guys who you almost get a thrill of their mind is so powerful.
Yeah, their mind is their greatest weapon, and sometimes can be removed and used as a controller.
So yeah, there would definitely be a lot of phaser based mysteries for sure.
I feel like Sherlock Holmes would find a way to use a phaser not as a weapon. You know what I mean? Like perhaps as an investigative tool, or as an early warning system, a tripwire or something like that. Or he could tell from the amount of carbon scoring on this phaser that there's no way that it was used in this murder. Like he would have a knowledge of phasers in the same way that Holmes has his revolver and he shoots holes in his own wall. I guess there'd be a lot of phaser holes in the wall of his apartment.
He does that. He
would burn VR to the wall of his apartment with a phaser.
Oh sure, yeah.
But as far as what happens in this story, though, I don't know. Maybe Watson, the ruse is that they call Watson back to the Englischerhof because of a hunting accident. Somebody went out to hunt some stags with a phaser.
I've not thought about the concept of hunting with a phaser.
Yeah, phaser hunting.
Huh. Has that ever happened in Star Trek? Well, no, because they are like, we replicate our food. But someone's got to do it.
Yeah, that's a good question. That's what I like about these technological exchanges. We always find more layers of the onion to peel back. So we always see our crews crash landing on a planet, and the shuttlecraft is totally borked. We're going to have to survive. And sure, there's probably Federation ration packs, but when those run out, do you just go collect berries, or do you go against your future veganism and start taking down the local wildlife?
It probably depends on the person, because it seems like...
Oh, yeah, Worf would go for it, for sure.
Yeah. Or just like, I don't know. I'm sure most of the people are like, they don't think about it too much, you know?
Yeah.
Like, oh, yeah, we don't really do this, but I don't know if they have such a heavy burden on them thinking about, you know, animal products or whatever, because you know, there's plenty of episodes where like, oh, I got the real stuff, you know, and it's like, okay,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
like they're probably cool with it, you know. But I was sort of thinking like, so is there like, because you got to make sure your phaser's set at the right level. You don't want to just stun a deer and then you've just got an unconscious deer, and
The
it's like,
deer wakes up on your hood, the hood of your shuttlecraft.
you don't want to set it too high and it just vaporizes them like in Wrath of Khan, you know.
Right. Only the antlers are left. Yeah.
yeah, you don't want that.
Yeah, there would be a very fine tune for hunting, the phaser hunting setting.
Yeah,
Good phaser hunting.
they probably special make them. You buy them at a Bass Pro Shop or whatever.
I want to see the Bass Pro Shops of the 24th century. Oh, these laser rod and reel sets.
You see phaser collection.
There's a 7-day waiting period. Let's talk about the Star Trek episode, Elementary Dear Data, and if phasers did not exist in that world, what then? And unfortunately, I think we're going to have to get pretty esoteric in order to make this work.
Yeah, because there's not...
There aren't any weapons at all in the episode.
This is a classic we solved it by talking episode.
Yeah.
Which they like to do a lot. Let's get us some action, you know?
Yeah, so if phasers don't exist...
There wasn't even like a... Right, there wasn't really a B plot, right? Where they're like, oh, we're under attack. And
just sort of like, you know, the concern, the B plot of concern.
Yeah. Yeah, that's more of like a reaction shot.
There is a real... it's, you know, it's early Picard still, but it's a real interesting reaction from Picard because they do the ready room scene and Geordi's in his little outfit and he's explaining what happened and Picard's like, shit. And then he kind of leans back in his chair, you know, puts his hands behind his head and he's like, okay, all right. What do we do here? What do we do? He's just kind of like thinking through. He doesn't immediately like have a Picard speech or something. He's sort of like, okay, this is a new one. What do we do with this?
One thing I do like about Picard is that like something like this will go down even later on. And he's like, well, what's everyone else think? You know, like,
right. Yeah.
This is maybe he wouldn't be so like, you know, but
we might have made another living being again. God, I hate when we do that. Yeah. So if phasers don't exist, by extension, in our little game here, which is afoot, phased energy weapons don't exist. So they're still using guns or you know something else in their future.
Maybe they would invent that lever that Moriarty makes.
Which have a lever?
We haven't talked about that lever.
That's true. Yeah.
That is one thing I love about the episode. It's so absurd, but he's like, I've become smart enough that I've made this crank or whatever, and it shakes the ship. I love that.
I have a brass lever that like wrests control away from the ship.
Like he invents steampunk. You know?
Yeah, I was thinking about that. Like I wonder why they're probably antithetical to each other's brand, right? But like why have we never seen steampunk elements in Star Trek?
Yeah, I'm sure. Well, I'm trying to think how you get there.
Because Victorians in the future is a pretty good description of Star Trek.
Yeah, that'd be cool if they ran into like a steampunk society.
Oh, sure.
Like there's a giant clock coming towards us, and it's actually their ship, and it's like, look at all the gears.
It's made of brassium. Yeah.
It gets rusty.
Well, man, we're screwed here.
Yeah, that's why I was trying to talk about something else, because I was
maybe phasers, so phasers are like ranged weapons. Maybe ranged weapons don't exist at all. And so our crew is more familiar with edged weapons. So then when the English guy pulls the knife on them, Picard's like, that's not a knife. This is a knife. And he pulls out his future vibro blade that all Starfleet officers carry with them.
It would be great if it's Star Trek, everything is the same, but they have these crazy big machetes.
Yeah, they just carry because if you want to think about the British naval tradition, they'd all have swords anyway, wouldn't they?
Machete Trek. And it's just
Hack Trek, yeah.
Yeah.
I think we did about as good as we could.
We got dealt a pretty dirty hand that time.
If they're worried about this raises a question. If they're worried about facing Moriarty, in the holodeck, and the computer it allows a robot to walk around. Clearly, the holodeck scenario will allow things from the future to come in. So why don't they come in armed with phasers? And then when they see Moriarty, just shoot him down, and presumably it would affect him. Maybe not, because he's the equal of Data, and Data wouldn't be felled by a phaser. But they could have vaporized Moriarty.
They probably don't want to try anything funny and then tick him off.
I think it would have been cool if the crank is cool. We've agreed at that.
Yeah.
But I think it would have been cool if Moriarty had, taken control, found a way to affect the world and reality of the holodeck. We see when they come back to the holodeck that things are kind of fucked up, and it's sort of like half in, half out. But it isn't necessarily related to Moriarty's control. And if he was able to, if he could put them in a maze, or if he could make them tiny, or if he could manipulate the world, I think that could have been really interesting.
That'd have been if you had Moriarty as a more reoccurring character. He could be like the Riddler or something.
Yeah.
For them, I'm gonna make you go on some crazy mystery,
Yeah. I mean, that's kind of a Q thing, but yeah. But this would be in the holodeck. It's totally different.
The holodeck Q, yeah.
Holodeck Q.
This could be a thing they agree to do for fun.
Yeah, fuck us up.
There should. Oh, I guess they do interact, but there should have been an episode where he wins over Barclay a little bit,
Oh yeah.
Sort of gets.
Yeah, you've got another character who's obsessed with the holodeck, and then you've got this guy living in your holodeck, and they never really meet.
He helps with the trying to get him out.
Yeah,
he does help in that episode, but it would have been great if there was a Barclay-based episode, maybe.
Yeah, he's just hanging out with Moriarty.
Yeah,
doing science and math because he's an evil mathematician.
Yeah, I love that too. That's a great element of this character, is that he is a professor of mathematics, but he's also a crime boss, which is pretty cool.
Yeah,
that's right. That seems very British to me.
Yeah, or very Gus Fring, from Breaking Bad.
Oh yeah.
Kind of a mundane person.
Again, another way that its inspiration has just
sure
seeped into everywhere. People love that kind of guy.
Well, I think we finished our role. We solved the case here. So should we tell people what's coming up on the next episode of Backtracking?
Yeah, you have to help me out with this one, because I don't remember our reasoning here, but we're going to be talking about the original series episode, The Squire of Gothos, and how it relates to Explorers, which I don't remember what that was.
Explorers is a Joe Dante film. Joe Dante, director of Gremlins, from 1985.
That's fantastic.
I refuse. I will not give away the connection, because that is what we'll reveal on our next episode. But I will say that it is a very fun and entertaining and overlooked film. And as far as Star Trek connections go, let me tell you who's in this thing. James Cromwell, Robert Picardo, Dick Miller. Hello.
Wow. Well, Robert Picardo is in every Joe Dante movie.
That's true. And Dick Miller as well. Yeah.
Oh,
So-
yeah. Oh, man.
So yeah, we'll be talking about Explorers on our next show and probably end up talking about Gremlins and Gremlins 2 a little bit. And it's Ethan Hawke and River Phoenix are in it as well.
Oh, my gosh. This is going to be awesome.
Yeah.
Never seen it.
Look forward to that. That's it for this week's Backtrekking. And thanks for listening. If you like the show, tell a friend. And you can follow us at Backtrekking on Twitter and tell us what you think that we should look at in future episodes. Can we tell the people where they can find you online?
You can find me online on Twitter. I'm at GUIFame.
And I'm at KA1IBAN on Twitter. And you can find all the shows on the Just Enough Trope Network at Just Enough Trope on Twitter. And that is it for us for this week. We will see you soon. And until then, keep on trekking.